One of the biggest crime mysteries that people still talk about is what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. And usually when you say that, people will lean in. Remember, he disappeared from a restaurant in Bloomfield Hills here in Michigan back in 1975. So the theories, the searches, the digs, not only here in Michigan, but around the country. Now, one cold case group believes they know where he is buried. And the case breakers say his remains were moved to Milwaukee, of all places, and they say the clue hinges on a playing card. All right, so for all things Hoffa, we're going to turn to Scott Bernstein. He's an author and a true crime expert. Scott, it's great to see you. Appreciate you being with me.
Thank you for having me.
So before we even get started on this latest theory, I want to ask you, what is it about the mystery of Jimmy Hoffa that still has so many people intrigued years later? I mean, you live this.
Yeah, I would say it checks all the boxes in terms of an iconic unsolved crime. I mean, you have politics, the mafia, missing bodies, the pension fund, Las Vegas. You got, people that are straight out of Central casting, like the Giacalone brothers, Tony Provenzano. You've had movies and television shows, and it's just become ubiquitous. And I think the mythology feeds on itself. And even though there's been very little tangible results from any of these investigations or digs or searches, the less you find, the more interest it gains. So it's been if you're a Detroiter, like a Hoffa dig is like a rite of passage. It's like they happen every couple of years, and I tell people from outside Detroit, it's like a football tailgate.
Well, it's one of those things. It's like the FBI's out. It's like, what are they doing? Okay, let's go ahead. Let's see if it's Hoffa. So talk to me, Scott, about who the case breakers are, what they think that they've found that leads them to Milwaukee, of all places, and the site of an old stadium.
Yeah, the case breakers are a nonprofit, independent cold case investigative unit headed by a pretty renowned investigator, Tom Colbert, who's considered, I think, the world's leading expert, or one of the world's leading experts on the D.B. Cooper case. Turned his attention to Hoffa, his group, over the last couple of years, and there was a deathbed confession in 1997, April of 97, from a one-time dirty Chicago police officer who became a mob associate and alleges to have been part of Hoffa's kidnapping from the Marcus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township on July 30th, 1975. As he was dying, he had his niece with him, who was also at that point a police officer in Wisconsin. He moved from Chicago to Wisconsin in the 70s, had been pretty close to the Chicago Mafia Don, Joey Aiuppa. And on his deathbed in 97, he took a Ace of Spades playing card and kind of scribbled a map that eventually took investigators to the old Milwaukee County Stadium, and mentions Joey Aiuppa's name, the Chicago Mafia boss, and says that Hoffa's body was buried there in September of 1995. So 20 years after he died. This theory is that he was taken from an undisclosed previous location and put under the third baseline at the old Milwaukee County Stadium. County Stadium has been torn down for over 2 decades. It got torn down in 2021. It was the former home of the Milwaukee Brewers of Major League Baseball. They now play down the street or next door across the road at, I think it's called American Friendly Field. It used to be Miller Park.
Mm-hmm. So when, when you come up with this, and this group obviously has some credibility looking at cases past, what does the FBI then do with something like this? And again, knowing that the feds can't run on everything, but what would hinge them to say, this is something that I think that we got to look at?
Well, I'll tell you from my reporting and my sources, the FBI is not taking this seriously at all. And I think the case breakers used, this is my theory, so I can't speak for the case breakers, but I believe the case breakers used a press release last week to leverage action from the FBI, because over the last couple of years they've been stonewalled by the FBI, who doesn't put really any credence in this theory, and frankly, neither do I.
So, I mean, when you look at all of this, and as we age and as time gets further and further away from what happened, do you think that we're ever going to get some kind of concrete closure on this?
No. I think we know 99.9% what happened. We know who did it. We know pretty much where it was done, pretty much how it was done. We don't know for certain what exactly happened to the body, but most people that have investigated this case and that are, in the quote unquote know, are of the opinion, as I am, that there is no body. So people have been running around for a half century looking for something that doesn't exist. Body was most likely incinerated or put into a crematorium within, half hour of him being killed. One of the hot spots that people point to is the former site of Central Sanitation, which was in Hamtramck, that burned down months later in a suspicious arson fire before the FBI could get a search warrant in there. That was a company that was owned by members of the Detroit Mafia. So I don't think we'll ever have 100% closure, but I think we know enough that I would implore the federal government at the 50-year anniversary, if there's still nothing been found at the 50-year mark in 2025, that they should shut down the investigation. Just tell us what we know officially and say this is the government's belief of what happened, and now we're moving on, because this has been literally hundreds of millions of dollars put into this, and right now it's kind of just a matter of pride. And at some point, you got to cut your losses. I don't care how embarrassing it is for the federal government that they were never able to solve this. At some point, you just have to call it quits.
All right, Scott Bernstein, true crime expert. I really appreciate your expertise and hope to have you on coming up in the future here on some of the other cases that you might be looking at. It's really fascinating, and people love to follow cases like this. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Christy.